AWS History and 10,000 Foot Overview. In this video, we'll be learning about a brief history of AWS, what its global infrastructure is, and an overview of the currently available AWS services. I will start by introducing a brief history of AWS, what the global infrastructure looks like, as well as a general presentation of the available AWS services. You don't really need to know about this going into the exam, but I believe it is a very good background for you to have. In 2004, the first service was launched, which was Simple Queue Service, or SQS. We will be learning about SQS later on in the course. In 2006, AWS itself got launched. In 2010, it was reported that all of Amazon.com's retail web services were moved onto AWS. In 2014, the first certificate got launched, which was the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate certification. In 2015, AWS broke even on its revenue, and in 2016, it was named as a leader in the Gartner IIS Magic Quadrant for a 6th year in a row. As you can see from the brief history of AWS, it has had a spectacular evolution. Many employers are looking to migrate their existing applications onto AWS, or they're looking to actually develop new services with AWS. Now let's move on to the global infrastructure. AWS is composed of regions. Each region is a geographical area and is completely independent. A region is composed of 2 or more availability zones. An availability zone is a data center, and each availability zone is isolated. But the availability zones in the region are connected through low latency links. Let's take the case of Ireland, or EU West 1. It is composed of 3 availability zones, EU West 1A, EU West 1B, and EU West 1C. They are all connected through low latency links and can communicate with one another. But for example, if EU West 1A goes down either because there's a flood or a snowstorm, the other 2 can still provision applications and can still maintain your applications without going down because they're completely independent from EU West 1A. They're in very different physical locations. Now, let's move on to edge locations. An edge location is a CDN or Content Delivery Network endpoint for CloudFront. We will be learning more about CloudFront later on in the course. Basically, an edge location is used to cache files closer to a user's physical location. Now, as an example, let's take a user from Canada that requests a PNG file from an edge location, from our AWS cloud. What is going to happen is our user from Canada is going to have his or her request redirected to the edge location. The edge location is going to look at its cache and see, well, I don't have the object that the user is asking me for, so I'll have to go to Ireland and ask for this object. Now, because the edge location is going to make a request to Ireland, to our AWS environment there, we're going to wait a bit for our AWS environment to respond with this object to the edge location. The edge location is going to update its cache with this new object and then send it off to the user from Canada. Next, when the second user from Canada in a very similar physical location as the first user is going to come and ask for the same object, the edge location is going to look at its cache, see that the object is present, and not go to the Ireland region, and instead actually deliver the object directly to the user. This ensures low latency for the second and third and fourth and so on user that is going to come and request the same object. Now let's see the actual global infrastructure on the map. There are currently 16 regions, 42 availability zones, and over 60 edge locations. There are regions like Ireland, Virginia, Sydney, Tokyo, and edge locations all over the world. For example, in Warsaw in Poland and Vienna in Austria. In places that don't have a region, to ensure that all the users in the world can have a good experience with AWS. Let's have a look at the services that AWS offers. The first category is networking and content delivery. A VPC, or a virtual private cloud, is a virtual data center in the cloud and allows you to isolate your AWS resources. We will be covering VPCs in depth in the course. CloudFront is a CDN and makes use of the edge locations that I have mentioned before to deliver and cache objects, for example websites or video content, to your users. Direct Connect is a dedicated connection from your premises to your AWS environment. This means that the traffic from your premises to AWS and vice versa will not go via the internet. The dedicated network will also mean that you can expect more consistent speeds for your connection. Route 53 is Amazon's DNS, or Domain Name System service. It helps you to connect your users' requests to your AWS applications, and it will also map names such as www.test.com into numeric IP addresses, which are then used to establish connections between computers. The next category is the compute one. EC2 is a virtual machine in the cloud. It gives you the power to run any application. You have control over the server and operating system. For example, installing and updating software. We'll be covering EC2 a bit later. ECS is a scalable Docker container management service. The advantage of it is that you don't have to install, operate, or scale your own cluster. It uses EC2 instances as the nodes of the cluster. Microservices and web applications are good use cases for ECS. Lambda is the serverless resource that AWS currently offers. It allows you to run your code without provisioning servers. Lambda integrates with other AWS services. For example, it can be triggered when a user makes a request to your API via mobile or a web application. Some other use cases include Internet of Things backends, as well as stream and file processing. Elastic Beanstalk helps you to quickly deploy and manage applications on AWS without having to worry about provisioning the infrastructure for them. Beanstalk will also handle autoscaling and load balancing for your application, but you will still have control over the resources that have been provisioned. The next section is storage. S3, or Simple Storage Service, is a highly available and durable object storage. Some use cases include storing user content such as files, music, and videos for backup and recovery, and it also forms the backbone for storing data for big data processing and serverless computing. Glacier is a highly durable and cheap object storage for archiving your data. A good use case is storing data that is infrequently accessed and that is required for audit and compliance purposes in domains such as health services or financial services. AWS Storage Gateway helps you to connect your on-premise environment with the AWS Cloud Storage. EFS, or Elastic File System, is a file storage for EC2 instances. It allows for multiple EC2 instances to use it at the same time and serve the same content to your applications. Now, let's move on to migration. Snowball, or import-export, allows you to migrate petabytes of data to AWS. Transferring the data with Snowball is very fast and solves the case when you have a lot of data to transfer, but you are limited by your internet connection and the transfer would take a few weeks or even months. VMS is a data migration service which helps you to migrate your database from AWS to AWS or from your on-premise to AWS. Server Migration Service allows you to replicate your servers from on-premise to AWS. You can automate and schedule the migrations. Next is the database section. RDS is a managed relational database service for databases like MySQL, PostgreSQL, and Oracle within AWS. You don't have to worry about installing, patching, or backing up your database. AWS manage all of this for you, and you can have control over when you want to upgrade to a new version, or when backups should be made. Instead, you won't be able to access the underlying instances that are running your database. DynamoDB is a fast, highly available, and durable NoSQL DB service. Elasticache is an in-memory cache which can take the bulk of the workload from your database. For example, if you have many users requesting the same information, instead of having your app retrieve the information from the database each time, you will go and use Elasticache to serve the required information. Redshift is a petabyte-scale managed data warehouse solution. We will be discussing databases later on in the course. Next, let's move on to management tools. CloudWatch is a way to monitor your resources in a near real time, get logs, set alarms for metric data. As an example, it offers metrics such as CPU utilization and number of requests for EC2. But if you need an unsupported metric such as memory utilizations, you can create your own custom metric. CloudFormation allows you to write templates to define your infrastructure. It is a very useful tool because you can redeploy the whole of your infrastructure or deploy it in a new region if you want to. CloudTrail is a way of auditing who has done what on your platform. It tracks API calls and delivers log files to you via S3. The logs include information such as the identity of the caller, their IP address, time, and what the request parameters were. OpsWorks is a chef configuration management service. It includes automation for scaling your application based on load or time. AWS Config is a managed service that gives you AWS resource inventory, configuration history, and configuration change notifications. You can find both current and deleted resources using the service. Trusted Advisor is a service to help you reduce your costs and ensure you secure your environment. For example, it will tell you if you have allowed unrestricted access to your instances. Service Catalog is a tool to create and manage catalog of approved IT services on AWS, for example, software or virtual machine images. Next is the Security, Identity, and Compliance section. IAM, or Identity and Access Management, allows you to securely control access to AWS services and resources for your users and define what they are allowed or not allowed to do within your environment. Inspector is an automated service that checks the security of your applications running on EC2 and tells you about any vulnerabilities. Certificate Manager is a service that allows you to provision, manage, and deploy secure sockets layer or transport layer security as SLTLS certificates to use with AWS services. The Directory service allows you to use a managed Active Directory in the AWS cloud. Next, let's talk about Cloud HSM. It allows you to create encryption keys using dedicated hardware security modules. Now let's talk about developer tools. CodeCommit is a managed Git source control service. CodeBuild compiles your source code and runs the tests. CodeDeploy is an allows automated deployments on-premise and on AWS. CodePipeline allows continuous integrations and continuous deployment pipelines. Business productivity includes Workmail, which is a managed email service. Think about it more as an exchange, and WorkDocs, storage and sharing service. Now, let's talk about mobile services. Mobile Hub is a way to build, test, and monitor your mobile apps. Cognito is a way to authenticate your users and save their preferences. A device farm, you specify how you want to test your apps against real devices in the cloud. You can use whichever device you want, iPhones, Samsungs, anything that you might want to test your application on. Mobile Analytics records the app usage and its revenue, and Pinpoint is used to target push notifications. Next, there is a bit of artificial intelligence. Lex is a speech-to-text and natural language understanding service. Poly allows for text-to-speech. Recognition is an image recognition service. And machine learning is a way to apply complex algorithms and predictions to your data without you having to know how to implement these algorithms. Game development. GameLift is an automated infrastructure deployment and auto-scaling for session-based multiplayer games. And IoT, or Internet of Things, is one service at the moment. AWS IoT allows you to connect hardware devices to the cloud, and then you can build a pipeline from this using lambdas or different services and get your information from the devices into AWS. Just a quick summary, we have covered the top-level overview of AWS. We know a bit more about AWS's history. We know what regions, availability zones, and edge locations are, and we have a better understanding of what AWS can offer us and what the services can do. In the next section, we will be learning about Identity Access Management, or IAM. We will learn about its components, the advantages of IAM, and all the benefits that we can reap from using it.